Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jessica Flynn and I am the owner and maker of Flynn Sisters Boutique. And today I'm going to show you guys how to do a matte and glitter peekaboo tumbler. So we're going to have matte surfaces on this tumbler. We're going to have shiny glitter sections, and we're also going to have peekaboo offset shapes. So there's a lot of different techniques in this tutorial, a lot of pieces that went into this design, and I'm not gonna lie, this is definitely not a beginner tutorial, but you definitely could edit this in a way to make it a little more simpler on yourself if you didn't want to do all the extra crazy work that I did. And it would still look great. So anyway, I really love this design. I love how it came out and the colors. I hope you guys enjoy this video. I also want to apologize for missing last week's video. This past couple weeks has been crazy in my personal life, and if you follow me on Instagram and Facebook, you've probably seen what's been going on. So I first just really want to thank the Flynn Sister community and everyone who has supported us through this and has been patient and kind and wonderful. I just appreciate you guys so much. And also, if you guys aren't a part of our Flynn Sisters community group, that is the best place for me to communicate directly with you and for you to ask me direct questions. So there's a link to my Flynn Sisters community group down in the description box. You'll also see links and maybe some discounts for almost all of the products that you see in this video. And I think that's enough chit chat for me. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're gonna start off like we usually do by sanding our cup, and then once we have it all sanded, just lightly, you'll want to wipe it down with some acetone. You can do this paper towels or coffee filters, doesn't matter. Then I prime it with a white matte spray paint, and I'm applying less than 1 milliliter of epoxy to my cup. This is just 5 milliliters of epoxy that I mixed, and then I'm like only using a little bit of it. You want to spread this on really evenly. Make sure there's no lines in your epoxy. After you get all the epoxy spread, you might want to wait a couple minutes just to make sure that all of those lines kind of smooth themselves out. All right, so next you're going to apply your glitter. I'm using Snow Confetti from Peachy Olive Glitters. This is kind of a larger cut glitter, so you don't want to apply too much. I was just letting it rip, and in hindsight, I probably should have applied a little less because it was kind of hard to smooth out with epoxy later. You're just going to want to tap off the excess and let this dry for about 2 to 3 hours. Tap off the excess again, and then you can go in with your first coat of epoxy. For this one, I'm applying 30 milliliters of epoxy for the first layer since this is only a 12-ounce skinny. This first layer is going to dry for 4 to 6 hours on the turner, and then I'm going to go right in with my second coat, which will take 8 to 12 hours to dry, and then we will start sanding. The most important part about this design is how smooth you get this bottom layer of glitter. You want to make sure that there's absolutely no bumps around the rim, on the top and the bottom and the side. It really does have to be super smooth. If you find yourself sanding a lot, you might want to consider just going in for a third coat before you start to do your stenciling and paint. I actually did 3 coats on mine, and I'm really glad that I did because I don't want to sand too far down over this glitter, but I also want to make sure that I get things super smooth. So once that's all done, you're going to want to start designing your decal. I measured the full length and width of my cup, which was 9.5 inches by 5.5 inches, and I started with a rectangle that size in Cricut Design Space. This design is going to require us to make 3 sets of decals. One will be the original shape decal for the peekaboo, the other will be the outline decals, and the next will be the stenciling decal for the matte sections after the final coat. So what I'm doing here is I'm pulling up one of the original shapes, which is my snowflake, the offset that I created in Inkscape, and I'm also adding in the Hello Winter decal as well, along with the outline for that. The Hello Winter design will actually be a real decal. It won't be peekabooed, but I will peekaboo the offset. I know that sounds kind of weird, but you'll see what I mean in the end. Now, again, I've already created the outline for these in Inkscape. I'm not going to go over that in this video because I've already done a couple different videos with this, which I will link down below if you need some help creating an offset. So all I'm doing here is I am going to size my original snowflake shape to fit inside my offset. I'm going to select them both and group them together so that I can duplicate and arrange them on this rectangle that we made. Basically all I'm doing is mapping out my design and seeing how many of these sets of snowflakes I want to cut and put on my cup. I'm also going to appropriately size my Hello Winter. I'm gonna, size what will be the actual decal and the outline. For this one, I only wanted it to be like a little less than 2 inches. If you wanted to do this a simpler way without all the offset stuff, you totally could by just creating 2 sets of decals. So like one set of your just regular snowflake designs and your wording decal, and then you would duplicate all of those decals because you're going to need 2 sets. You're going to need one set to do the stenciling for your paint peekaboo, and then you're going to need another set to do the stenciling for your matte peekaboo, okay? So that's why this one's a little more complicated, because essentially you're going to do a peekaboo design twice, one with your paint and one with your matte process, okay? This one that I'm doing is just a little more complicated because not only am I going to do the 2 sets of peekaboos, I'm also going to include a offset. So the decals that I create to do the matte peekaboo will shadow the offset version of my decals. I know this is crazy complicated and I'm really sorry. I just didn't want to compromise on this design. So if you guys want to try the crazy complicated way and you need some extra help, I would encourage you to join our Flynn Sisters community group. That's a great way for all of us to get together and help you out. But like I said, you could definitely do an easier version of this if you wanted to. All right, so once I've got everything mapped out, you want to start duplicating your offset version and you're gonna slice the other version. So here you'll see I make a duplicate of that one. I'm gonna ungroup it. I'm gonna delete the original version and keep the offset. And then with this one, I'm going to slice it and keep the outline and the original. All right, so here again, I'm gonna duplicate this. I'm going to ungroup one. I'm going to delete the original. On this one, I'm going to slice it and delete the black one and keep one original and one outline. And I do this to all the snowflakes. The Hello Winter will stay the same. And then just keep in mind you're going to have one set that will have a pretty shiny hollow vinyl, and the other will just be like a regular Oracal 651 stenciling vinyl that you'll end up trashing. Doesn't matter what color it is. So what I like to do is once I get all these sliced and taken care of, I'm going to group all the ones that will be made with pretty vinyl on one side and all the ones that are going to be made with my stenciling vinyl on the other side, and make sure that they're 2 different colors so I can cut them on the 2 separate vinyl choices. Alright, so I've got them all separated, and I'm going to make this one color. This will be all the ones that I cut with Oracal 651. Those are my stenciling shapes. And then these ones are going to be my pretty vinyl shapes. These are the actual decals that will be staying on the cup. So I wanted to make them distinguishable to make sure that I put the right color vinyl on the right mat. So we're just going to cut these and get them all weeded and ready to go on our cup. So the first set of decals we're going to be putting on our cup are our first set of stenciling decals. These are what we're going to use for our paint peekaboo. And again, for the Hello Winter decal, we are just going to be peekabooing the outline of our decal. All right, and then we're going to get all of our original snowflake shapes on there. I try to emulate the original design that I had mapped out in Cricut Design Space, but sometimes that doesn't always work out. That's fine. It doesn't really matter. You're just going to apply these original shapes to your cup. And remember, these are just stencils. We're going to be painting over them. All right, and then once we've got all our shapes applied, I am going to paint over this with Rust-Oleum 2x flat silver lilac. While that's drying, I am going to start cutting cutting and weeding the decals with the cute shiny vinyl that will actually be staying on the cup. Now, I picked a really difficult worded decal for the Hello Winter part. It's got a lot of tiny pieces. What I did was I kiss cut around the more sensitive pieces that I couldn't weed and left that on the decal, and I'm going to transfer that whole thing onto the cup and weed it on the cup later. This is how I usually do decals that have really tiny impossible pieces that I just can't weed without messing it up. And then these snowflake outlines, I'm just going to weed them like I normally would. Again, with this part, you just want to have the outline of the snowflake. And again, if you run into tiny pieces on the snowflake that you're having trouble weeding, just leave it on there. You can weed it once it's on the cup. Now we're going to remove our first set of decals that we put on there for our paint stenciling. Yes, this part is a little bit tedious, but just try to be careful. Make sure you don't scratch your paint. Your paint should be completely dry when you go in for this step. All right, now you'll notice that I really struggle getting these snowflakes off. Again, if you want to make your life easier, maybe pick a more simpler shape. This was extremely tedious and took way too much of my time. I wish I would have picked an easier snowflake to use. Whatever. Okay. So next I'm going to be applying these outline decals, and I'm going to apply them directly over my paint. If you had sanded prior to doing your decals and paint, you should not have to do a layer of epoxy before adding these outline decals. Also, I'm using really good transfer tape, which I will link down below in the description box, and it does not pull up paint if you're applying decals straight over spray paint. So basically all I do is just cut off half of that transfer paper from my decal and then very carefully eyeball it and place it over the shape there to outline it. Yes, this is really hard to line up. I wish there was some kind of magic way to do it, but there's not. It's just kind of hard. It really helps if you picked like all different kind of unique shapes that would be easier to match up, or like all different size shapes, because I really had a hard time figuring out which outline went with which snowflake. Same problem that we ran into with the leopard peekaboo offset. But the results are totally worth it to me. Anyway, so I'm just applying this outline right over the spray paint. If you notice that transfer tape is not lifting up any of my paint at all. Like I said, if you guys really lay your paint down on a sanded epoxied surface for this project and you do nice even coats of paint, you shouldn't be lifting up any of that paint with your transfer tape. So here I've got the first one done. Again, I wish there was some easy magical way to do this, but there is just not. I just kind of have to eyeball it and do my best. Once I got all the snowflake ones on there, I went in with the wording part. And with this one, I'm not gonna lie, you guys, I really struggled with this decal. It took me a lot of time and I really had to kind of mess with it. I am really glad I didn't weed it completely beforehand, but it was pretty hard to line up. So I did the bottom part first because I figured those kind of blocky letters would be easier to line up. And I just laid my decal on there, tried to line it up as good as I could, and then I actually cut it in half midway through to put the hello part in separately. And then once I got it laid, I removed my transfer tape and went on to weed those sensitive parts that I had left on there that I couldn't weed earlier off the cup. So yeah, don't be like me. Pick like an easier decal to work with. If you guys want to use the same decal, I will link the design below. I bought it on Etsy. I think it's super cute. Whatever. All right, so once you get finished with that super fun decal process, you're going to want to seal this up with some Quick Coat. Quick Coat is a water-based urethane sealer. It's going to seal those decals so that they don't bubble up under the epoxy, which metallic vinyl sometimes has a tendency to do that, which is why I like to take this extra step. This takes about 45 minutes to dry, and then I'm going to put another coat of epoxy over that. This coat of epoxy should only be between 10 to 20 milliliters of epoxy, and then I'm going to let that dry for 8 to 12 hours. And then we're going to start doing a little bit of finishing sanding. For this particular cup, it's really super important that you're very careful with your finishing sanding because you can risk scratching that paint through the epoxy. So if you don't have to do any sanding, I recommend not doing any if you don't have to. But I always like to sand my top rim really lightly, just to expose a small line of stainless steel up there at the top. You want to make sure you don't sand down too far and like sand off some of that paint because you can expose the glitter. You definitely don't want that. So sand super lightly, be careful. I'm only doing this so that I can create a seal up there at the top outer rim rather than creating the seal at the top upper rim. It's a little more durable that way. I'm going to clean that up with some dish soap and water, dry it off with coffee filters, and then I will apply my real final coats, which for this one took 2 more final coats, and I got it completely smooth. Now, I'm going to reiterate that you really want to make sure that these coats are completely smooth before you do the matte process, because that matte paint is going to show every little mistake. So once we've got everything smooth and our epoxy is, has had about 8 to 12 hours to dry, I am going to apply the stenciling decals for our matte sections. Now, this is going to be applied to the very, very final coat of our cup. So once the coat is completely finished and totally done and totally perfect, that's when we will start this matte process. So I'm going to apply these decals over our Peekaboo sections that we created earlier, and I'm just kind of eyeballing them very carefully, only removing like half of the transfer paper at a time so that I can kind of maneuver them and apply them where they need to go. For this part, I am using Oracal 651. I would recommend not using removable vinyl for this part of the process because we are going to be scrubbing over this with water and steel wool. So definitely want to use permanent vinyl for this. Alright, so once we've got all those stenciling decals applied, we're going to take this over to the sink and get started on our process to make the surface matte. Alright, so I'm using the Final Sand Sanding Compound from DIY Epoxy. Again, I will have a link down below on where you can get this stuff along with a 10% discount. And I'm using grade 00 steel wool. I will also have a link to the steel wool that I'm using. And you're just going to work in a circular pattern and uniformly sanding the whole surface of the cup. You want to make sure that you apply even pressure to every surface of the cup, and you probably want to do a few passes. Like just when you think you're done, maybe go over it again. Like I had to go over this a few times just to make sure that everything was fully sanded how I wanted it to get the level of matte texture that I was after. You also want to make sure that you pay special attention around those decals to make sure you get in all the little nooks and crannies to sand it up. What we're doing is we are permanently like etching the surface of our epoxy. Okay, we're doing a very fine sanding process to make that epoxy have a permanent matte finish. You do not need to seal this. You do not need to epoxy over it because you will lose the matte finish. And this is non-toxic. Okay, so this is not like an etching cream. This is not matte spray paint. This is like a permanent matte finish to your epoxy. Okay, so a lot of people were confused with that, and I got a lot of questions on like, do you need to epoxy over this? And you do not, because you will lose the matte finish. Again, we are permanently lightly sanding the surface of our epoxy with like micro granules of silica to permanently etch that epoxy. Okay, so you'll want to make sure that you are really happy with the level of sanding that you got with this process. You know, make sure it's fully dry, make sure everything's even and that you like it before you remove the decals. I forgot to show myself removing the decals, but really you just remove the decals how you would normally remove a decal from like a Peekaboo design, and then that's it. You're done. There's literally nothing more that you need to do. The cup is completely finished, and I absolutely love how this turned out. I know it was a lot of work to get here, but I'm super pleased with the result. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Thank you so much for watching my video, and I will see you guys again on Wednesday. If you love this video, you could check out our last video here. Also be sure to find us on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and of course subscribe for all our new videos that come out every Wednesday and Saturday. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.